Hello, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the World Government Summit COVID-19 and Government webinar series. Today our session is titled, How will COVID-19 reshape the global digital economy? Without further ado, I'd love to introduce our esteemed moderator for today, Rebecca McLaughlin-Eastham, anchor from Euronews.
Thank you so much, Reem.
Thank you, Rebecca. Handing over to you now.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure, as Reem said, to welcome you all to this one-of-a-kind virtual webinar for the World Government Summit. We have people online joining us from more than 80 countries around the world with some of the highest levels of engagement, not only from the UAE and wider region, but Europe, the States, UK and Africa. So we very much look forward to hearing from all participants globally at the end of our session, when there will be time for your questions. So please just kindly submit them in the Q&A section. The topic today, as Reem said, is how will COVID-19 reshape the global digital economy? And the digital economy is one that the world has been unable to ignore in recent years, with its meteoric growth and relevance for people all over the world. COVID-19, of course, has highlighted the digital economy further still. We've seen it flourish, with innovation and creativity becoming ever more important in our lives, meaning that digitalization is an enabler that can accelerate growth in economies and create more inclusive futures for societies. But this can only really be done, we can only fully harness the power of technology through collaboration between governments and the private sector. And this has to be done for the greater good of humanity. And so with the COVID-19 pandemic as our backdrop, as our context for this discussion, given all the challenges, often transformative ones, that it has presented companies around the world with, the World Government Summit in this session wants to explore how business leaders are revisiting their approaches to business. How is the business model changing? And what are they identifying as solutions for the challenges that they're encountering? Well, without further ado, I would like to introduce my two esteemed panel members who will be sharing their views with us today. First up is Raghu Malhotra. He is the president of Mastercard Middle East and Africa, an executive responsible for driving the company's global strategy across 69 markets. Very warm welcome, Raghu.
Thanks, Rebecca.
I'd also like to introduce Joy Ajlouny. She is the co-founder of Fetchr. She is a serial entrepreneur who has built a reputation for her success in startups and ventures right across the world, all the while disrupting the status quo for women in business. Joy, a warm welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. What a nice introduction. It's great to be here. Thanks.
So everybody is joining you in a virtual welcome, I'm sure, as well. To kick things off and to set the scene, Raghu, let me start with you, if I may. Offer me your perspective on our topic today.
Thank you, Rebecca. First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor and a real privilege to be here. Thank you for all the people who are joining in from around the world. We appreciate your time to hear some thoughts as well. And Joy, thank you very much. As I was talking to you, I hope to survive the session by the end of the scale. So a real pleasure to be on the panel with you as well. So if when we talk about digitization, and what's really happened is people start to talk about digitization and COVID as if it's the new mantra for everything. The reality is digitization and the journey we've been on has been around for 5 to 7 years at a fairly rapid speed. For a bit of time. I think what COVID has done is it's acted as a catalyst for 3 or other aspects of digitization to come to the fore. So the first one I would say is, I think it's making people understand. So if I was to think of education, like people are now educated about what digitization can do for them. Governments, industries, SMEs, across all of these plethora of types, I think it's in the minds. I think digitization has started to accelerate. So I think that's a really big thing. If you think about what probably happened when you had people starting to socialize with each other on digital platforms, it required a mindset change. So I think that's one part that's actually happening through. So I don't believe digitization is new, but I think the mindset is new. The second, I think what it does is It will make governments change how they actually lay out policy. You mentioned private and government sector partnerships. I think partnerships will become more inclusive. Earlier, different industries did what they did to be part of a value chain. I think there is a realization that you most likely have to have a more inclusive way of how that partnership evolves. And technology, I think, will make people be more inclusive. So I think you'll create technology that will be more inclusive. That in turn drives digitization. So I just wanted to set that context. In the wake of what the World Bank says is probably unprecedented times for global economy. And I think they talked about that the global economy will recede by 5% and even more than just the global economy regressing by 5%. I think the worrying fact is they're talking about 130 million people who will move into the ranks of the poor or what is below the poverty line by 2030. And I think all of us need to start to think of those aspects and what we can do to transform in there. So as we go forward, I'd love to actually talk about saying these are really the challenges we all have as humankind, and really how do corporates respond, whether it's big corporates or small corporates or startups. I think all of us have a role and responsibility to play in that. So that's my little perspective, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raghu. Beautifully put. Joy, you're nodding in fervent agreement to much of what Raghu was saying. In particular, talk to me about the change in mindset. It's not just a dynamic shift of a business or a sector or an industry, it's mindsets too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Raghu, and I think it is a mindset. So changing behavior is probably the hardest thing that you could possibly do. And I think what's really interesting is that in the last literally 8 weeks, we have completely, by force, because of the unfortunate incidences of COVID-19, we have literally leapfrogged 5 years, and we have done something remarkable. We have actually changed behavior. And by changing behavior, we have been forced, we've been pushed 5 years ahead into automatically embracing a digital economy and using a digital economy. So that is one of the positive things of COVID-19, is that it has forced us to move forward. But there's a lot of things that need to change. And I think that there are a lot of different governments that are all focusing on this. And I think that the Middle East has an advantage, which I'll be speaking about later on in the program, as to why I believe we have an advantage to this digital leapfrog.
That's a great place to start. Talk to me about the region. We sit here in the United Arab Emirates, but looking further afield, and what advantage do we have in terms of leapfrogging and taking advantage right now?
Look, I think that the thing that needs to change, and it's a controversial thing, but it's 100% government policy. If we're going to leapfrog into the digital economy, it is 100% government. It is the key factor for empowering the digital transformation. It is policy, 100%. So I can give you a basic example. We're talking right now on Zoom, right? We're speaking all over the world on Zoom. Voice over IP is something that was not allowed in this region, and now all of a sudden it is. And this is a very important thing for business, and it's something that I speak about all the time. It has enabled us to conduct business in a way that we never had. So here it is. This is a basic, simple example. And I think the exciting part about this region of the world is that, you know, in order to leapfrog into this, you need policy. And in the Middle East, policy can be done in an hour. Policy can be changed in 5 minutes with a stroke of a pen, where in other regions of the world, you know, you have death by bureaucracy, and you need a meeting to have another meeting to decide that meeting, and it takes forever for these things to change, where in the Middle East, it can be simply changed with a stroke of a pen, like voice over IP was done, and look, here it is. So that's an advantage for the Middle East, and it's also an advantage for China. You know, anywhere in the world where policy can be changed quickly will definitely empower and help the digital transformation to leapfrog. Absolutely.
Moving from government to the corporate sphere, Raghu, I have to ask you, working for Mastercard, one of the biggest companies in the world, how easy is it to change strategy or policy with the stroke of a pen, to coin a phrase? Is it a slowly turning tanker, or is it something that you can quickly put into practice, especially when it comes to moving with the digital economy, which is moving so fast?
Rebecca, it's a really, really good question. And the actual answer doesn't lie in how quickly do processes and policies change. I think the reality is only companies that have a great culture can actually adapt that fast. So it's all the good you did in the years past that matter today. So if you're going to start a transformation journey today because of COVID, it's a little too late, I feel. I think you'll see the companies who will come out of this stronger and better are companies that actually have put in place or they took care of their workforce in a particular way. They developed them in a particular way. They had strategies that were, I would say, a little broader and flexible, which allowed you to actually respond to a very digital environment. You know, it's great to have policy that can be changed overnight. The reality is policy affects consumers, customers, merchants, SMEs, big industries. How quickly do they respond to policy is equally important. And I think that's really where it boils down to it. I can give you a couple of examples on how we've thought through COVID, and maybe this can help other people on the call, especially if it doesn't really matter whether you're SME or large corp. You really have to start thinking of this in 4 phases. And Mastercard, we started to think of saying, phase 1 is really about containment. Phase 2 is about just being stable, so stabilization. Third is normalization, and then comes the growth phase of it. And every single person in the middle of it now will be in different stages of that. It just depends on which country you're in. And policy making, etc., actually comes as part of that for us, as part of the corporate. You know, I talked about corporate and cultures, etc., and I think it's important. I personally look for how a company is responding to the challenge of cost, right? Because revenues have gone down almost overnight, and it's really hard because in the end, you have to actually deliver shareholder return. So you actually start to cut costs. But companies who have not cut costs by taking the labor force out, for me, are companies that are great companies. Those are companies that have actually probably had more nimble processes that allow for a transformation to take place without taking out the people. You kind of need that in the new digital economy as well. Like we made a commitment, I think pretty much in week 2, saying we will not lay off anyone because of COVID. We will do what we need to do, but we will not do that. For me, I think that cultural shift allows for the transformation and how we respond to policy as well. And there are many other aspects to it, like governments, SME, financial inclusion. How do you actually enable consumers to respond to a digital economy? But I'm happy to answer some of those questions later.
Just picking up on that quickly, in particular, when you talk about your employees, how are they being affected by the changes that Mastercard is enforcing in light of the digital economy?
You know, when we had the first, when I had the first ever all hands deck call, I think one of the things we talked about, and this is a personal reflection of mine as well. I was actually thinking, I'm very grateful to work in the company I work for, where you could take a call and saying we will not lay off anyone. But also you have to see how your workforce responds to it. Our workforce has responded so positively. There is no drop in efficiency. If anything, we wanted to create some new work streams, right? And we made an offer out there saying, hey, listen, we want to create new 5 work stream. And because we are not going to hire a ton of new people, whoever wants to volunteer to do it. We had to close down our email boxes. I mean, that's the sort of response we got. We had, I think, 30 or 40 times more or 100 times more in some countries, responses coming in where they want to do it. So there is a response that employees also, in a particular positive response has come through. And I don't think this will stop. They will remember this. And it actually makes you a better place to work in. That allows us to develop our people better, which means we will respond better because we'll have better corporate memory and muscle power. So I think all of these things there's a thread that actually binds it all together.
Joy, talk to me in that regard, but from the SME perspective, in terms of working from home, working remotely, is that an opportunity or more of a challenge for those looking to launch a business or go into a startup?
Well, I think it's a challenge. When you're doing a startup, your team is everything. So you're really working with a small team, and that kind of flow, that kind of corporate culture, it's not a corporate culture, but it's a startup culture, is really important because you're constantly bouncing off ideas off of each other. So it's been difficult. I mean, for a startup, the COVID is definitely difficult. And, these conference calls that we're doing right now are great, but it definitely hurts the team spirit kind of energy. Absolutely. So, but this is the way we're going forward. People are doing less meetings, less flying for events, obviously, because of what's happened. So this is the new norm, and this is the way it's going to have to be. So we're going to have to improvise with other things to create that spirit of working together as a team.
Raghu,
you wanted to jump in? Forgive me for interrupting.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Joy said, right? So I did mention SMEs briefly. And Joy, I know, is very specifically talking about startups, but I think there is some connection to SMEs.
Yeah.
One of the things that will really transform, and I think you'll see a lot of action taking place in the sphere, is in the SME sphere. They account for over 90% of businesses around the world in terms of just numbers, right? They employ more than 50% of the global workforce. And in some countries, they employ up to 75% of the workforce. Mm-hmm. That sector is going to go through huge transformation. So clearly, that was something we were working very closely with that sector in terms of digitizing supply chain, getting better working capital for SMEs, more transparent flows, which we were struggling with. But now we start to see policy coming in a particular way that drives that change and adoption. We certainly have SMEs who did not really want to get into the digital economy, very keen because they suddenly feel cut off without being digitally connected. So I think that's going to be one very, very profound change that will come through because of COVID. And I think that will be a great positive because if you get that sector going, that's the mainstay of most economies. And it employs people. So I see great good coming out of it because I know we keep talking about the negatives of what's happening in COVID. If we do this well, I think we will be in a better place across the board. And that's why it will all be about startups and SMEs as well. Both innovation as well as what we do with the small and medium price sector.
Joy, I'm sure you'd agree. I'm keen to get your view on your forecast, basically, because the digital economy, of course, has been a major front for progress, but also I want to really hone in on the key trends that you see developing over the next 5 years. What do you see on the horizon?
Well, look, I think there are sectors that absolutely need disruption, right? Coming from a startup background, ed tech, health tech, food delivery, logistics, and absolutely fintech, right? So these are areas that need disruption. Now, with that being said, I think there needs to be a marriage between, policy and the startup ecosystem. I think more now than ever, it is really important that the two work hand in hand. Because, like, I can give you an example, right? Ed tech. Everybody is now, teaching online. What does that mean going forward? Or something that is more like health tech. You can't get over to a hospital. Can I do diagnosis online? Can I speak to a doctor online? And can you give me a prescription online? I mean, this is part of the digital economy, right? But that's a governmental policy. Is that policy going to change to get into that, digital space, or even fintech? Can I transfer money without going to a bank? How am I going to do payment solutions? So these are all things that are regulated, right? And I think now more than ever, there's going to have to be this marriage between policy and the startup ecosystem. And, these startups are disruptive by nature, which is why these corporates buy them. because there's no way a corporate could ever move faster than a startup who can get on the ground, take a look at these ever-changing policies and react to them right away and get in and grab market share, and then, you know, and actually be a force to be reckoned with the big corporates who have no choice but to buy them. That is the whole point of the startup ecosystem, to create jobs and to disrupt corporates where they are forced to actually come in and buy them because they can't make this change fast enough. So I think this is the exciting part that I see in this digital economy. How do you disrupt all these things? How do you make this marriage? And how do you create jobs, not only in the region, but all over the world?
Raghu, let me take your opinion.
Yeah, I love Joy's philosophy around these things. I don't know whether this is contrarian to what she's said or it's complementary. We'll let Joy decide that. I don't think it's one or the other any longer. So when I talked about inclusion, I think most people talk about consumer inclusion into the financial services sector. I also feel inclusion has different connotations on what might happen. I don't think the fintechs or the startups by themselves can be successful because they need scale. Similarly, large corporates cannot be successful by themselves because they need speed and innovation.
Yes.
So till now, there are two parallel paths that kind of ran, and it's like as if they're at loggerheads at each other. I believe those things will change. And I think industries will become more interoperable. So a good example is today, if you think of the regulatory authority on telecom, is different to the regulatory authority on banking, right? So they have two different governance models, do different policies. But many parts of the world, I think there is interoperability that started to take place between the telcos, which is the mobile money world, and then we have banks that are regulated in there. And then you have micro lenders that have started to come in, and you have a bunch of what I call enablers, which are fintechs that are coming in. Without that ecosystem thriving together, this will not work. And I think policy needs to also start to become wider than a sectorial policy. You got to create ecosystems. We are a global economy, and all of us are products of globalization because it became interoperable. Breaking it down to small fragments will take away the efficiency of the work. So I feel right now it seems as if they're at odds with each other, but I feel this will actually change as well. It will become much more inclusive and interoperable, and you'll have better economies of scale, and you'll actually have better product solutions and convenience and safety for consumers in the long run. They will get what Joy is talking about. Not just by one sector or another one.
Well, I think it's a marriage. I don't think one can live without the other. I think corporates need these innovation and startups need scale. So I think it's not one without the other. I think it's a marriage of both.
Fantastic. Thank you to everybody online. We're very much enjoying your company and your questions, which are flooding in. Please keep them coming. Our panelists eagerly await your questions. And here is one from India. Raghu, I'll come to you first on this, and then Joy can pitch in too. Our viewer says, as the digital economy creates new value pools, what will happen to the earlier ones? What do you think these future value pools will be? Raghu, any thoughts?
Yeah, so it's not that you're creating a future value pool. So if you mean, is value created differently, is probably the question, which is the right question. Saying, will value be done differently? That you're already seeing that, right? So if you just go back to very basic economics or how you were taught corporate finance, they will do a discounted cash flow model, and they'll look at the revenue, and then they'll value your company. That model is already disrupted in terms of what are values of what, and that's how you then create shareholder value, which in turn, by the way, is owned by the public, and therefore in the long run, that is actually spread across a wider audience in whichever form they participate in. So that's one way of looking at how value creation is done. It's not that the value creation, it's just done differently in a digital world. It doesn't mean that the value that got created in what they call an older non-brick and mortar world has no relevance any longer. I think they'll transform. I give you a very simple sort of example, because a lot of people ask me about cash versus digitization. I'm saying, you must understand that cash was just a conduit to do trade. Cash by itself doesn't mean anything. We started out in the beginning by doing barter system, and the barter system was nothing but a conduit to trade. You started to introduce precious metals as a way of fair value exchange. You moved that to money, and you had to have bullion to back up the cash. Then you now have currency notes. We've always transformed as humankind. Mm-hmm. This is just another manifestation of next shift. It doesn't take away the very basics. If I break it down, it's about trade, it's about commerce, it's about convenience and safety. So those basic principles, I do not think will really transform.
Just to jump in, there is a quick follow-up before I come to you, Joy. Raghu, there are still lots of people around the world who simply don't have access to digital payments or even basic bank accounts, internet. They're very much reliant on cash. So how do they specifically benefit from an evolving digital economy?
Yeah, so really good question. And again, it's down to that single word I talked about. It's called inclusion and interoperability. In the past, our traditional way of looking at getting people included in the formal economy was that you will go into the banking sector. The banking sector has a particular cost structure to it, which was geared for a very different transaction time, right? Now you're really talking about a very more inclusive system where you've got the telcos coming in who actually operate with mobile money equivalents. Now, if you create a parallel currency in the economy, as let's say airtime, I feel that's going to have its own set of challenges, because you can't run with two parallel currencies in a single market. The economy is run on some basic principles, monetary fiscal policy. Yeah, that will not change. However, if it is a fair value of exchange between one and the other, which has some commonality to it, at that point of time, you'll start to see that. Whoever asked the question, I don't know whether you know, we 4 years back made a promise to include 500 million new consumers into to be financially included. We said that we'll do it over 5 years. We actually finished it in 4 years. Just a few months back, we have now announced the next 500 million, saying we will include another 500 million. So in effect, what we're saying is we will include 1 billion people who were never financially included. So companies like ours, we continue to deal with all our traditional customers, but there is a huge trust and foray for us personally in Mastercard, where we are actually playing in that space to actually get people more digitally included. That will allow for that interoperable ecosystem to have many other players who are not being able to service them to start to come in there. That's where fintechs, startups, insurance providers, service providers, logistic providers can all play as part of that ecosystem and develop probably a better economy.
Thank you. Joy, actually, let me pick up on the fintech side of things. A lot of questions coming in regarding that in terms of how you see the scene developing and making that digital shift. What's your opinion?
So in my experience, one of the greatest obstacles we have for growth is cash. Everything in my experience, and again, I'm speaking in my experience as somebody who ran a logistics company, COD is still 97% of all transactions. So there is a way of doing business here, which is cash driven, which still has not been disrupted to eliminate cash because of what I talked about earlier, which is behavior. Changing behavior is a really tough thing to do. And I think the next big win will be disrupting this cash business, because in spite of this, e-commerce has grown in leaps and bounds, even with this obstacle of cash on delivery. So I think that's something that digital economy, the innovation going forward, and how do we eliminate cash is definitely something that's going to catapult the ecosystem here for sure.
Yes, please, Raghu.
I just can't help just jump in every time George speaks. I couldn't agree more, and that's why I said I think it's the evolution of cash. Joy, I have some figures which I actually was just looking at just 2 days back. So just give us a sense of what might be happening. But before I get there, I don't know how many people know, they all think cash is for free. Cash costs between 25 basis points to 150 basis points in every single economy around the world. Now, when you're growing your economy at 4% and you have a cost base of just putting in printing cash, this is the actual physical side of it. The fact that they're not included because they're using cash is a separate aspect of why economies don't grow in them. So that itself, if you were to eliminate, is the sort of value you create.
I sorry to interrupt you, but I agree with you 100% on what you're saying. But I can tell you that there needs to be a disruption in fintech. This is the region that, you know, people always say to me, well, you know, is there opportunity here? Absolutely, there's opportunity in the Middle East. Absolutely, and the biggest opportunity is in fintech, because this is the area that needs disruption. If you can disrupt people feeling more comfortable not to use cash, then you are going to evolve here as the next unicorn, because that is the magic sauce. Because the banking industry, again, and I say this with respect, has a lot of rules and regulations that cause you, I mean, not to be dramatic, but to cause you to have your hands tied. So you want to grow, but yet, you know, this is something that needs to change. And I think that this is something that everybody is focusing on. Fintech, the banking sector, how do you disrupt this region? And I'm excited about it because I think it's like a ripe fruit picked, you know, when you see a fruit on the tree, ripening, just ready to be picked. And like I said earlier, despite all of these things, e-commerce is still booming in this region of the world. Imagine. So I'm excited about it. And as an investor myself, whenever I see something in fintech, I'm always excited to hear it because I've experienced it and I know how exciting and how lucrative this aspect can be. And I'm sure that you would agree with me, Raghu, you know, that eliminating cash will definitely boost the economy.
Raghu,
I agree. I totally agree with her. So, you know, we've just seen contactless payments as well as e-commerce has actually doubled since just the beginning of the year. I'm not going to give you stats over last year because that's just barometer. I'm just talking about in 3 months. So normally to actually double growth probably takes you 24 months in a very fast-paced sector, right? If you're really doing a great job, it takes you 24 months to start to double your growth in there. And I'm already talking about billions of dollars from our systems that already are transacted in that e-commerce world. That's all happened in less than 2 months. So it just gives you
well, if you want to talk to me offline about my ideas of how to definitely come up with something disruptive, I can give you, you know, my 6-7 years experience in dealing with COD as 97% of my business. So glad to give you some tips offline.
I will happily take them.
Don't do it offline. Let's talk about it online. We all want to be privy to these interesting conversations. To get to some more of the questions flooding in, thank you again to everybody watching. We really do appreciate your contributions. We've touched a bit upon PPPs, but if people really want to know, what are your thoughts collectively on partnerships between public and private sectors in enabling economic recovery? And how does this really feed into supporting SMEs? Joy, I'll come to you first on this one.
Well, you know, SMEs, I'm in the startup sector, so I'm going to change the SME to startups, right? Okay. I think there are some incredible initiatives going on. Actually, I can say this, that I'm actually wowed. You know, the UAE, for example, you know, they have Gadan 21, which is a $50 billion investment over the next 3 years, right? By His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. I hope I said that correctly. And he basically is investing $50 billion over the next 3 years to this ecosystem. And then just recently, you know, the Abu Dhabi government has announced that they're launching an additional $535 million in funding to invest not only in startups, but to invest in venture capitalists who want to invest in startups in this region. So to me, wow. I mean, as a startup that started here in this region 7 years ago, I wish this was available to me, and Hub 71 is doing this. To me, to me, this is a huge initiative, which means that the governments really see in this region of the world that the startup ecosystem is something that they want to invest in. So I say this to a lot of startups that, you know, good times and bad times, this is really the best time to start a business. You know, people say, oh, it's a bad time. Not at all. You know, Airbnb came about in 2008 when things were at its worst. So there are great companies that come up in the worst of times. And I'm really positive. I mean, I know that COVID has really taken a hit on everybody, but I feel very positive that we are going to overcome this because of the region, like I said, that we have the ability to make decisions in policy. And I think the government is committed here in this region of the world to make these quick decisions to help the ecosystem. So I actually see a huge advantage for startups and to build the ecosystem. Yeah, we've been hit, no question. I think the world has been hit, but I don't see this as the end. I see this as we got knocked down, but we're going to get up again. And I think it'll take a couple of years, but I think there's some huge opportunity in this region. And I wish I had these opportunities 7 years ago.
Just before I come to you, Raghu, let me follow up on that, Joy. Speak to the startups out there who are struggling, who are finding it tough at this time. How do they weather this storm? And given your experience having built startups from the Middle East to Silicon Valley, what's the biggest mistake that you see startups making?
Oh, money. The biggest mistakes is who is watching the money. You really have to make it stretch. Because right now, you know, investors are not going to give you the valuations that you want, right? So getting money at this time is going to cost you a lot in equity. So you're going to be hit as a founder, right? Because the valuation of your company is not going to be in high because of the certainty. So stretching that dollar as long as you can, or dirham, or whatever the currency is, as long as you can, is the most important thing. You know, you really have to make it for the next, 12 months. How do you stretch it? And if you can do that, then you're going to evolve as a startup that's a winner. Absolutely. So money is a big one. Cash is king. Absolutely. Hold off because of the valuations. I really believe in that. And I think leadership is a really, really important thing, because how do you, when you're laying off people, how do you make sure that your team is excited about your idea, and how do you weather this storm? Leadership is really important. And I say this all the time, just because you're a CEO doesn't mean that you're an operational CEO. There's a big difference between that. Being a leader and creating an atmosphere in your startup where you're like, okay, we have to lay off these people, but we're going to get through this, is a personality. And those are the Steve Jobs of the world. They're rare, but I think it's very, very important to get through it. But I'm very optimistic. I really am.
Thank you. Raghu, give me the global perspective.
Yeah, so two things. So some advice for the SME sector. And the second thing is, Joy talked about the region here. I feel there's a lot of disruption taking place. See, if you think about how does innovation come about? Innovation comes about because you're trying to solve a need. Now, if you think of developing and emerging markets around the world, they have so many needs and they don't have the infrastructure. So now it is no longer the purview of Silicon Valley where innovation is coming through. Absolutely. I know at least 4 or 5 things that we've done in Africa that have been exported to other parts of the world, including things that we've done in Africa on how you can disrupt energy supply in the US.
Yep.
How you can actually buy crops and bring them faster by eliminating the distribution chain. So people which are on the call, I'm not going to spend too much time, but Google, connect, track, simplify, these 3 words. They're actual product programs that we run that allow for that disruption. But just on SME side, a piece of advice. And we talked about cash, and Joy first said she doesn't like cash. She said cash is king. So the 2 different.
Well, cash is king, trying to keep your business on survival mode, and you got payroll and rent.
But I'm kidding, Joy. I'm kidding.
Before you raise the next round. But
I'm just kidding.
If you allow me to just interject there for a second, I agree with you 100% in what you're saying. I think what you're saying is spot on. There's opportunity here, because there's a lot of problems to solve. You see, whenever you're raising money, and I've raised over $100 million for 2 startups, the reason that I have been able to do that is because I was solving a problem. And I think what Raghu was saying is that there are so many problems to solve here in this region of the world, where in the United States and other regions, it's more mature, that there is real opportunity. There's real opportunity in Africa and the Middle East to solve problems, because there's so many problems to be solved because the ecosystem is still small. So there's real opportunities here. And even investors in Silicon Valley are looking for those opportunities because they realize that startups that succeed are solving a problem. And there's a lot of problems here. So I agree with you 100%, Raghu, on this one. I think that there's never been a better time.
Yeah. So I would say Asia and Latin America and parts of Europe as well, and the high growth emerging markets have similar issues. So it's not contained to one, it's a typo. No. But just SMEs, right? There is one word, I think, if they remember that, the word is called transparency. Feel SMEs need to start to think of this word transparency and have to think on how much does not being transparent cost small businesses. The reality is, if your flows of how you do commerce were done in a transparent place, they will get better access to working capital. Because they fragment that, they don't realize they're not actually getting the working capital. The thing that makes or breaks an SME is cash flow. It's not the balance sheet, it's not the P&L end of the year. It is the cash flow.
Absolutely.
Where you actually have banks, micro lenders, fintechs actually giving you better access to working capital is through seeing everything in a transparent way, which means platforms that are transparency. So my one piece of advice, because I feel this is the area that's going to be completely disruptive, there will be people who will invest in that, is SMEs have to start to think saying cash is not their enemy. Cash is probably their enemy. Digitization is not their enemy. And therefore, they need to start to think much better, transparent flows of how they do that. I think that makes a huge, huge difference.
Well, even in my sector, in the startup sector, I think what in the past, it used to be all about growth, like, WeWork, with the mistake with WeWork and Uber and others. There's an insane amount of growth, but they yet have not made sense of the unit economics. So I think that there's a huge change in the startup community where now they're looking for this cash flow that you're talking about. Like there's got to be positive unit economics. It's got to be profitable. And before, it used to take longer to get to profitability. So the investors were investing over a 5-6 year period. But now I think because of what the lessons that we have learned in the startup community is that now investors are more looking for what you call cash flow, what I call positive unit economics.
Let me jump in with another question, and it's more the human aspect. The digital economy, the digital revolution, the fast advancements that we're seeing and embracing, for the most part, positively disrupting so many sectors that we've talked about. One of our viewers says, could the next virus be a global digital virus? We're completely losing contact with people, how to communicate, interactions are failing. Will corporations fail to invest in making sure this doesn't happen as much as they're investing in digitalization? Jo?
Great question. I would love to answer this.
Please.
I think we are in huge danger of a lack of human in connection. Absolutely. I've been seeing it even during this whole COVID time. We're becoming so efficient of not seeing each other, not meeting with each other. I mean, we become so efficient that we never have to leave our apartments and we can do everything we need to do, but there's no human interaction. And I think we're in a huge situation that could cause depression, lack of human emotion. I think it'll cause divorces. I think it'll cause, a huge series of problems where people don't know how to communicate with each other. And I think we've already seen it in social media. I think social media has caused a huge divide between the human connection. So yes, this is something that I have talked about and I'm passionate about, is that where is the emotion in digital? And where is that human aspect? And unfortunately, I believe that we're gonna have to figure out how to put the human in digital.
Raghu, let me come to you, because right at the beginning you talked about the human heart, the human compassion that's needed with corporations. How do the two dovetail, digitization, advancements, and humankind with the workforce?
Yeah. So, in our company, we have a term we use, it's called DQ. So everybody talks about IQ, they talk about EQ. We also have coined, I love to take credit for it, was our CEO who invented it. DQ is decency quotient.
Yeah.
It's the human element of how you come to work. And that's what I talked about, corporate culture, the DNA, the very ethos of what makes people work. I actually inherently believe that humankind are social. It's a social species, right? We are going through this digitization, but I feel and I have enough faith in humanity that it'll understand that it actually feeds off each other. And if you only have discussions which are very siloed, you will not grow as a human being. I think we all evolve because we actually interact in a particular way. So I do feel that a balance will be restored again. So, and I feel a lot of people were talking to me about complete change and shift in labor and workforces and how there will be enough and more change in that space in terms of, do I really need to have every single employee come to office every single day? Can I have only 25, 30% come at different times? The answer is probably yes. I don't know what that percentage looks like. But will it ever be that you don't need to interact with each other to actually get the best out of teams? Because innovation doesn't come by a single person.
Exactly.
Team environments and using other people's brains.
Absolutely.
Clear calls, you will not be able to capture that. And personally, I can tell you when I first started doing the calls and running these businesses since March to now, it was okay. And I realized when I'm doing calls from morning till night, by the evening around 6:37 or sometimes even later, my concentration starts to waver. And that means I'm discussing something very important. If I miss out on one sliver of a piece of information, I could take wrong decision. And I think as most people are sitting and working out of home, when you start to internalize all of this, you realize that that physical interaction has a part to play in what we are as human beings. I feel it will come back with a balance, not precisely the way it is. And again, back into culture, big companies, startups, I think have a very good culture and how inclusive they are with the employees, etc. Right? True for SMEs as well, because it's small teams, right? You just tend to work better. It's the large teams that you need to start to think of and how you get the best out of that. So I have hope and faith that it will come back. Time shall tell, but we don't have that much time. I'm sure it will be okay.
I'm personally not a fan of work at home. I coming from my space, and again, in my opinion, I absolutely think that there's an energy that people feed off of each other when they're in an environment where they're all together. I'm definitely not a fan of working from home. That's my experience. There's a human interaction that you can never, ever, ever, ever replace.
Yes. Another question that we've had from a viewer, thank you again for sending them in. Is the digital economy going to be influential, have some part to play in the tourism sector, so badly hit obviously by the COVID-19 pandemic worldwide? Joy, let me come to you first. Any thoughts on that, opportunities, challenges, and then Raghu?
Yeah, I mean, the tourism sector, obviously, they have all these virtual experiences, these digital virtual experiences where you can go through a museum, but, there's nothing like, walking into a museum and seeing it live, the experience of walking in and seeing the paintings and the brush strokes, So do I think that, virtual tourism is going to take over? Absolutely not. Again, the human interaction, the experience. So no, I think, after 9/11, it took 3 years for people to feel comfortable to get back on a plane. And I think nothing is going to change as well with after COVID-19. I think it's going to take time for people to feel comfortable to get on a plane and travel. I think what's happening now is more people are doing staycations, which is what I've been seeing as the trend. In other words, they're staying put, but checking into a beautiful hotel for a couple of days where they don't need to get on a plane. So I think the hotel business will definitely pick up, but it'll pick up from people in their own regions. It won't be like it was, but again, you have to be creative and pivot in the time of COVID, which I think Dubai has done a great job, by the way. I've seen a lot of my friends checking into hotels. I'm sure, Rebecca, you've seen that too, right? So, yeah, that checking into hotels has definitely been a way to keep the business going for these hotels.
Most
So
definitely.
I think to get back into full force, I think it's going to take some time.
That magic word pivot. Raghu, do you agree before we have our closing remarks?
Yeah. So, Joy used the word experience. So I believe in that. I think we ourselves had done some surveys almost a year and a half back, and most consumers were really about getting a better experience. So I think where you'll see digitization play a part in just the whole experience of your journey. So I think travel corridors might change, whether it's staycation or you go close by or you change the country you go to. Experiences will never be replaced. You want to experience things in there, but how you experience it will probably change. So I can tell you, this is no secret, many years back, we even discussed this with a few governments, including here, is you could sit at home and actually just sitting at home, decide and plan your entire experience or your travel digitally as a start, including entering an airport in advance. It uses advanced biometrics and it uses AI. So you don't have to stand in immigration lines. It's just by actually passing through, it will tell you who you are. And then your digital experience might change like that, but you'll not replace the experience by itself. These are not things that will be out in the future. These are things that actually people were experimenting with for the last 3, 4, 5 years. It just did not have scale because the ecosystem had not developed around it. With COVID and the travel, what again, sorry, everybody's educated enough to know it might go digital. I feel it will accelerate that sector to allow for that transformation to take place.
Lovely. Let me come to you for some closing remarks, Raghu. In light of everything that we've discussed so far, how can major players like Mastercard and others contribute to shaping the future of the digital economy? What's the key takeaway here from you?
Yeah. So I would say 4 things that come to mind. I won't elaborate on all 4 of them. I think the first thing is corporates need to understand on the role they need to play as part of policy making. That is not the purview of just governments. Corporates have to take a much more active stance on what policy should look like, whether it's on data privacy, cybersecurity, interoperability between industries, and so on and so forth. So I think that's one. I think it's something we believe in ourselves. We do that. The second is just inclusive growth is going to be very important, whether it's for including more people in the whole financial services sector and just getting them included in there, or doing what we talked about in the SME side. So I think just being more inclusive. The third one we talked about is culture and how we actually form that. And there's a fourth element, which I think is personal, which is what will each one of us do to make this world a slightly better place. It's very easy to put the onus on corporates and governments and industry players and fintechs to create that new, better tomorrow. For me, that fourth aspect is not being talked about enough during this time. And I think it's a time for all of us to just step back, reflect on us as human beings, and see how we contribute. The power of that is humongous. It's huge. So that's the fourth element for me, and that's just the human aspect. That's whether you're in a corporate SME or wherever you work, it doesn't really matter. So for me, I think those might be the 4 to kind of just think about.
Wonderful, thank you. And Joy, let me come to you for some joyful words to round off our webinar in terms of digitalization as an enabler that can really accelerate growth in a perspective. What's your takeaway?
Could you repeat that, because there was a little.
No problem. In terms of digitalization as an enabler that can accelerate the growth of economies and societies right around the world, from a startup perspective, what's your key takeaway from our discussion today?
Well, I mean, basically what I said earlier was that I think there is needs to be a marriage of policy and innovation. I think there needs to be a marriage of both, because, you know, innovation can't flourish without changes in policy. You know, and like I said, there are so many problems here that need solving, that I think that if we can do that and come to an arrangement that makes sense for both parties, that I think that this region will flourish, one. And two, I think, you know, the region that we live in, you know, with the drop of oil prices as well, which is something that we haven't talked about, has really forced us to think about what our future looks like. And I think that's something that has happened that has really changed the way that we think as well for the segment. But I think, like I said, you know, I think my main focus in the future is this collaboration. I think the takeaway for me is, I think it's a collaboration, because I think everybody is focused on the same outcome, you know. And I also hear everybody talking about, you know, the after COVID, what is going to be the new norm? I don't think anybody really knows what that is. You know, I think once they find a cure, I think it's not going to be all digital, and it's not going to be, I think there's going to be a new norm, but I think it's going to be a balance of the old ways of doing things and the new ways of doing things. I don't think it's going to be focused on one way or another. I think there's going to be a new balance, which we really won't see the outcome for at least another 3 years.
The new norm, yes, we live it and we await in anticipation of what it might look like. Thank you both so much for joining me today. Thank you, a virtual thank you from everybody online. Raghu and Joy, we wish you the best of health, and we hope to meet you in person, not just virtually, next time at the World Government Summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And without further ado, I would like to hand over for some closing remarks to Reem. Reem, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Raghu. Thank you, Joy, for joining us today. I think it's been a really insightful session. I definitely would love to point on one thing, which is with all the digital talk today on this session, the end result was that we need to also think about the human element in all of this. And I think one thing is made clear today also is that there are a lot of challenges that we will face over the next few years, but there's an immense amount of opportunities, not just for Mastercard or any other big corporation, but it's also there for SMEs and startups. So, and I think everyone on the call today has also been joining, asking for what these opportunities are. So I think they definitely did get a bit of an insight on what to look ahead for. So thank you to both Joy, Raghu, and Rebecca for this lovely session. I'd like to say thank you to everyone also, and stay safe. Just one last thing, we do have a session tomorrow also around the same time, around the reading signals and a guide to navigating the future post-COVID. And we've got a former US presidential advisor going to take place for that. So stay tuned for that too. And everyone, take care. And it's a pleasure to see you all virtually, and hopefully we meet in person soon. Stay safe and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reem. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.